Today I'm going to be reviewing the Animorphs book, Book 1, The Invasion. So if you're not familiar, there's a whole series of these books, and this is the first book in this series. If you are familiar with this series, perhaps you're a big fan of this series and you stumbled across this channel just by doing a search for Animorphs or something like that. Apologies in advance. I am approaching this as a total newbie. I know very little about this. I've only read the first book in the series, so this is not going to be an expert review. This is just going to be more of an off-the-cuffs reaction. So this series of books came out after my time. I believe this was published in 1996, at which point I was already starting university. And it's a series of books kind of aimed at, I don't know, 9-10-year-olds. Although it struck me, I was just thinking about this. I didn't miss it by that much. It was published in 1996. If it had just been published 6 years earlier, I would have been about 11, 12 years old. I would have been right about the target audience. This is one of those things about growing older, is now that I'm older, I look back and I think 6 years, that's really nothing. But when you're a kid, 6 years is a huge deal. Anyways, point being, I missed the series. I wasn't even aware of it until I stumbled across a YouTube video about it back in 2009, I believe. And I'll link to that video in the description down below. It was relatively easy for me to find that video again, even after all these years, because I remember the reviewer was apologizing for copying the reviewing style of SF Debris, who does a lot of Star Trek reviews, and saying, okay, he gave his video a similar name, like an opinionated review of the Animorphs. SF Debris does opinionated reviews of Star Trek videos. It occurs to me as I'm saying these sentences, I waste way too much time on YouTube, especially for somebody who is always lamenting that I don't read as much as I plan to read. That YouTube cuts into a fair amount of my free time. Especially back then, I think I just wasted tons of time. But anyways, point being, I first heard about this on YouTube, and I think it was at that point that I realized that this series had a big impact on people who were younger than me. 6 years younger than me, 10 years younger than me, 15 years younger than me. This I think was very popular with that demographic. As always, let me know down in the comments what your experience with this series is. When did you first hear about it? How popular was this in your school, etc. Since that time, I've heard about it here and there. The other thing that sticks out in my memory is I'm living in Vietnam now, and about 6 years ago, I was working with a Vietnamese teaching assistant, somebody again who's about 15 years younger than me. And we were talking about books. I had a reputation around the office maybe for being a bit of a bookworm, even though I don't read nearly as much as I wish I did. So he was talking about this series as being something that was very influential in his childhood. I don't remember now if he was reading it in English or if it had been translated into Vietnamese. But he as a middle school student in Vietnam was very into these books. And in fact, he was telling me about this traumatic event in his childhood. He was reading these books at school, and his teacher confiscated all his Animorph books because his teacher said that they were not educational. It was one of those things, doesn't seem like a huge deal, but when you're a kid, sometimes these little things can traumatize you because you're sensitive at that age. Sounded like this had been one of those traumatizing events for him. And ever since then, he had this chip on his shoulder about how his teacher had confiscated his Animorph books. And I mentioned something to the effect of I was aware that this series was quite popular with people younger than me, but I was too old for it. It had passed me by, and I was not about at this point in my life to go back and search it out. And then a couple days later, he had gotten a hold of some Animorph books again. I think that conversation he had with me had uh, stirred up the memory and inspired him to go back and search out these books again. And he had gone back and started rereading them as an adult. And he said to me a few days later, he says, "You have got to check these books out. I'm reading them now. They're every bit as good as I remember." And I didn't at the time. But here I am now, some 6 or 7 years later. This happens to me a lot. I because I don't read as much as I wish I did. I only get a handful of books read a year. So sometimes it takes me forever to work my way around a recommendation, but certain things stick in my mind. And then eventually, curiosity will get the better of me and I'll just check it out. The inciting event for me to pick up this book at this particular time was, first of all, you can see here it's a library book. I'm now working at a school that has a decent library, so I've got access to this. And on one particular day, I forgot to bring into school the book I was currently reading, so I had nothing to read for my lunch break. This was the second time this had happened to me that particular week, but I won't get into that. So I went down to the library and I was deliberate, because I already had a book I was reading. Truth be told, I already had several books I was reading. I didn't want to pick up a long book. I wanted to pick up something short and easy and something I would get through in a couple of days and then go back to the book I was usually reading. I had been reading. And I saw these Animorph books. And sorry, my camera is showing everything in mirror image, but you can get an idea maybe that the print on these books is very large, quite easy to read, a short book, something I thought I'd be able to go through in a couple of days, and sure enough, I got through it in a couple of days. So I picked this book up, read through it in a couple of days, and here I am with a review. So, you can see here, the cover of this book looks very 90s. Published by Scholastic, got some sort of bad CGI on the cover about a kid morphing into an Animorphs. It's this title, even though I never read these books as a kid, I feel like looking at this book, I'm feeling some nostalgia for these young adult books of the 90s. And I feel like I'm very familiar with the type of book. A series, ghostwritten. I think K.A. Applegate is actually not a real person. It's a combination of two people, man and a husband and wife team. Was quite typical of these books to be ghostwritten by several different people, although of course we didn't know that as kids. Something we discovered later. And that, yeah, I'm thinking right now, what books like this did I read when I was younger? When I was about 4th, 5th, 6th grade, the age where you'd be reading these books. And I can't actually remember any titles or series that I read, but I feel like I was very familiar with this type of book. I must have read some of them when I was around that age. And the style of the book feels very much like this style of book. So jumps into the action very quickly. There's not a lot of description, very light on exposition. Things keep moving. The narrator is a kid, and it's supposed to be written the way a kid would talk, but it's not quite. It's just off a little bit. The dialogue is, again, it's supposed to be imitating the way middle schoolers talk, but it's just off just a little bit. Let me see if I can find a section here right at the beginning. All right, so Marco and I had run out of quarters for the games, right when he was ahead by a lot of points. Mostly, we're equally good at games. I have Sega at home, so I get lots of practice time in. But Marco has this amazing ability to analyze games and figure out all the little tricks. So sometimes he beats me. Or maybe I just wasn't concentrating very well. I'd had kind of a bad day at school. I tried out for the basketball team, and I didn't make the cut. It was like no big deal, really. Except that Tom, he's my big brother. He was this total legend on the junior high basketball team. Now he's the main scorer for the high school team. So everyone expected me to make the team easy. Only I didn't. Like I said, no big deal. But it was in my mind just the same. Lately, Tom and I hadn't been hanging out as much. Not like we used to. So I figured, if I got his old position on the team... Well, anyway, we were out of money and getting ready to head home when we ran into Tobias. Tobias was, I guess he still is, kind of a strange guy. He was new at school and he wasn't the toughest kid around, so he got picked on a lot. I actually met Tobias when he had his head in a toilet. There were these two big guys holding him down and laughing while they flushed, sending Tobias's straggly blonde hair swirling around the bowl. I told the two creeps to step off, and ever since then, Tobias figured I was his friend. "What's up?" Tobias asked. I shrugged. "Not much. We're heading home." "Out of quarters," Marco commented. Certain people keep forgetting that the sleaze troll shows up right after you cross the Netherford. So certain people keep losing the game and losing our quarter. Marco kept jerking his thumb at me, just in case Tobias couldn't figure out who he meant by certain people. "So, maybe I'll walk home with you guys?" Tobias said. I said sure. Why not? Okay, it goes on, but you get the idea. Sorry for that extended reading, but I think that style is very recognizable as the style these books were written in for kids in the late 80s, 90s. Who knows? Maybe they're still being written in that style. Except, where is my copy of Harry Potter? Sorry, somewhere in this room I have copy. Oh, here we go. Harry Potter. Harry Potter was totally not in this style, right? Harry Potter. Let's read a bit to compare. Bear with me. Just from page 1. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4, Privet Drive, were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious. because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Gruning's, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on the neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and in their opinion, there is no finer boy anywhere. And then it goes on. If you remember from Harry Potter, the whole first chapter was talking about Mr. Dursley going around his day and just noticing things that were a little bit off. And then there was the dialogue with Dumbledore, Hagrid, and Professor McGonagall at the end of that chapter. But yeah, completely different style than these scholastic books. So yeah, there's probably more to explore there. I guess the point being that not all young adult books are like this, but the scholastic book series was certainly like this. I think, according to Wikipedia, the husband and wife team, K.A. Applegate, wrote like the first 4 books or something like that. They wrote the first few books in the series, and then they had outlines for the books, and it was ghostwritten by other people, as was the norm for these types of series. So anyways, excuse me. As you can tell maybe by the title of the book and the bad CGI on the cover, it's about a group of teenagers who acquire the ability to morph into animals. Morph into animals. They get the ability from an alien. To have the ability to morph into animals, and they use this ability to battle alien invaders. Credit where credit is due. The authors knew who their target audience was. I mean, it's ridiculous. But it's written in that style I was quoting earlier, where you just kind of go along with it because you're kind of expecting something ridiculous. I mean, you don't open a book like this without expecting something ridiculous. They don't waste any time setting it up. The flying saucer shows up on page 6. And then there's a lot of different aliens that show up. There aren't any pictures in this book aside from the one on the cover and here, despite the fact that, I don't know, some of these aliens, let me see if I can find a description of them. They were a bit hard for me to visualize. Where is it? Okay. Yeah. So here it is. The aliens. They leaped from the ship. They leaped from the ship, whirling and thrusting and slicing the air. Creatures that looked like walking weapons. They stood on 2 bent back legs and had 2 very long arms. On each arm, there were curved horn blades growing out of the wrists and elbows. There were other blades at their bent back knees, and 2 more blades at the end of their tails. They had feet like a Tyrannosaurus Rex. It was the head that got your attention. A snake-like head, a mouth that was almost a falcon's beak, and from the forehead 3 dagger-like horns raked forward. Okay. I guess now that I've read that out slowly just now, maybe I've got a little bit of a better handle on it. Maybe the problem the first time I read it, I was trying to go through too quickly, because let's face it, it's not the type of book that encourages careful reading. But yeah, some of these descriptions of the aliens, and yeah, there are, these aliens are called the Hork-Bajors. There are other aliens called Klaxons. There are other aliens called Andalites. Sorry, not Klaxons, Taxons. And then there are the controllers. It's a bit much at the beginning, and they all kind of show up again at the end. And I was like, okay, wait, what's a Hork-Bajor again? But yeah, the alien invasion. So these teenagers are given the power to morph into animals. Now the aliens are, for the most part, hidden, but they can take over the minds of different people. So there's a bit of invasion of the body snatchers thrown in. Like, okay, which one of you is the alien? These books aren't very subtle, so spoilers, I guess. The main character finds out his brother is being controlled by the aliens. And you can see it coming fairly obviously as soon as his brother appears. His brother is acting completely out of character and doing none of the usual things that his brother usually does, and his brother keeps trying to invite him to come to this new group they have called the Sharing. And it had already been set up by this point that the aliens were taking over certain humans. So you're like, okay, his brother is definitely an alien. To the book's credit, the main character's friend picks it up immediately. The main character, I guess, has trouble accepting this, although that's partly because of his emotional attachment to his brother. It doesn't want to accept that his brother is the alien. The characters from one of the aliens acquire the ability to morph into any animal that they touch. I don't know. They've got to spend some time touching the animal. It doesn't say how long. Like, I don't think it says how long. 30 seconds or so touching the animal, melding with the animal, and then they once they acquire through the touch, then they can morph into that animal. So that's their superpower to fight these aliens, but they also have to keep their powers a secret because they don't want the aliens to know who they are. It is, I mean, it's a kind of book I've been reading quotes from it, so you have an idea of the style. On the one hand, it's not going to win any literary awards. But on the other hand, it's a style just designed to be breezy and easy to read and keep kids turning the pages, and it does keep you turning the pages. I read this in a couple days, mostly just around lunch breaks and stuff like that. It's funny, this is a bit of a digression, but I'm at the stage in my life now with 2 kids and working and stuff like that I get my reading done during lunch breaks, so I'm always just carrying the book around, reading a couple pages where I wait in line at the lunch line. And I was sitting with the coworkers, and they said, "What are you reading?" And I pulled out the Animorph books, and one of the guys said, "What?" He said, "I thought you were an intellectual. Here I thought you were this intellectual guy, and you're reading the Animorphs." Yeah, I suppose maybe there's an event on BookTube going on this month called Garbogust. Maybe I can count this as my entry to Garbogust. There is a decently done climactic scene at the end. Although was a little bit hard for me to follow the action. Sorry, not follow the action, but map out maybe the geography of it. They were on an underground layer. They were trying to free these people and then escape from the outside. And at one point, kind of which direction they were running was a little bit confusing for me. But you could tell very clearly it was an escape. And then I trust I'm not spoiling everything when I say that it is not all tied up at the end, because this is part of an ongoing series. So the battle between the Animorphs and the alien invasion will continue. My library has... This is typical of my library. Hopefully the school librarian doesn't watch my videos. It's got the first 4 books in the series, and then we appear to be missing several books, and then it's got I don't know, like book 16. It picks up again at book 16. So I picked this book up just as kind of a silly thing because I forgot my normal book. It was pretty painless to read. I'm thinking about maybe continuing with some of the other books in the series. I'm not sure I want to completely read them out of order, but maybe I'll just read the first 4 books up until I get to the point in my library where there's a gap. There's also... I know this camera is going to show everything in reverse image, but there's a little flip thing you can do here. Does this show up? You can flip to see character change into the lizard. If that wasn't completely clear, then just get your hands on your own copy, and you can flip through it like that. Okay, I think I've spent enough time talking about this book. We'll close out here.